I write these words with a trembling hand, not from fear of what awaits me beyond this life, but from the effort it takes to hold this pen when the fever burns through my body like wildfire. The doctor says I have days, perhaps a week. Enough time to set down the truth, though truth is a fickle thing out here in the territories. It shifts like desert sand, revealing and concealing by turns. My name is Sarah Johnson, though for many years I answered to Nadewio Iachoi, which means strong wind in the Apache tongue. To the white settlers who've crossed my path, I've been known simply as Hawkeye, a name that spread in whispers across saloons and trading posts from Santa Fe to Tombstone. Before you judge what I've done, what I've become, you must know how my path began. I was 9 years old when my father sold me. It was 1859, and drought had killed our crops for the second season. The land that had promised so much when we arrived from Missouri turned cruel under a merciless sun. Father had a weakness for whiskey and cards long before the drought, but after it took hold, the weakness became an escape. Mother had died the winter before from consumption, her cough growing weaker until one morning she simply didn't wake. I remember how Father wouldn't meet my eyes that morning when the wagon came. His face was gray beneath his stubble, his hands shaking as he handed me a small bundle of clothing. "It's just for a spell, Sarah. Just till I get back on my feet," he said. But I knew even then it was a lie. I'd seen the way he looked at me since Mother died, as if I were a ghost haunting him, a burden he couldn't bear. The wagon belonged to a man named Elijah Knox, who ran a mining operation in the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. He wore a fine coat, despite the dust and heat, a gold watch chain glinting across his vest. 5 men worked his claim, he said, and they needed someone to cook and clean. That's what Knox told my father, but his eyes told me something different when they lingered on my face. I wasn't a child to him. I was merchandise. The father didn't look back as the wagon pulled away. He stood in the doorway of our failing farm, shoulders slumped, already turning toward the bottle I knew waited inside. I never saw him again. The journey to the mining camp took 3 days. Knox barely spoke to me, except to tell me when to fetch water or prepare food from the supplies in the wagon. At night, he bound my wrists to the wagon wheel. "Can't have you wandering off, girl," he said, as if I had somewhere to go in the vast empty land. The mining camp sat in a narrow valley. 5 rough cabins clustered around a larger one where Knox lived. The men emerged when we arrived, filthy, bearded figures whose eyes lit up at the sight of me. They had names, though it would be years before I could think of them as men rather than monsters. Weber, with his missing front tooth and quick temper. Clayton, rail-thin and silent, with eyes that never seemed to blink. Tate, the youngest, who sometimes looked almost ashamed. And the one they called the preacher, though I never heard him speak of God except in blasphemy. I'll spare you the details of those first months. A child should never know such things, and no one should have to read them. Knox and his men took everything from me. My innocence, my voice. For nearly a year, I existed in a place without hope, cooking their meals by day and enduring their cruelty by night. I learned to make myself small, to disappear inside my mind even when my body could not escape. I thought of Mother, of the stories she used to tell me about brave knights and fair maidens. There were no knights in the mountains. Until the raid. It happened during the early spring of 1860. The winter had been harsh and game was scarce. The miners were on edge, arguing among themselves over dwindling supplies. I awoke to screams and gunfire. The night split open by chaos. The Apache swept through the mining camp like a summer storm, swift, merciless, and gone almost as quickly as they arrived. I hid beneath the floorboards of the cabin, a space Knox had created to hide his gold, but which had become my refuge when the men's cruelty grew too much to bear. I pressed my hands over my ears as Knox and his men fought and died above me. I remember the silence that followed, the strange relief of it. Then the floorboards creaked open, and I found myself looking into the eyes of an Apache warrior. His face was painted for war, black and red streaks that made his features seem carved from stone, but his eyes held something I hadn't seen in a year, recognition of my humanity. His name was Nantai. He who speaks. Though I would not learn this until much later. He saw something in me that day, something beyond the filthy, half-starved white girl cowering in the dirt. When he reached for me, I flinched, but his touch was gentle as he lifted me from that hole. Outside, the other warriors were collecting weapons and supplies from the cabins. Bodies lay in the dirt. Knox among them, his fine coat stained dark with blood. The warriors argued when they saw me, their voices sharp in a language I didn't understand. Some wanted to kill me, this child of their enemies. Nantai spoke, and though I didn't understand his words, I felt their power. He gestured to the cabin, to the hidden space where I'd been found. Perhaps he told them what he suspected. Perhaps he simply claimed me as his prize from the raid. Whatever he said, it ended the argument. He placed me on his horse, and we rode away from that place of nightmares. The band belonged to the Mescalero Apache, led by a chief named Kasil in one who brings songs. They lived in the mountains, moving their camp with the seasons, following game and avoiding the white soldiers who increasingly patrolled the territory. Kasil was an older man with deep lines etched into his face and gray streaking his long hair. When Nantai brought me before him, the chief studied me for a long time before nodding slowly. The tribe was cautious of me at first. The women watched me carefully, especially Nantai's wife, Siki, whose eyes never seemed to soften when they fell upon me. I learned later that she had lost a child to white men's diseases the winter before, but their daughter, Dasati, only a few years older than me, would leave food near where I slept and sometimes sat nearby, humming songs I didn't know. I didn't speak for nearly a year after joining the tribe. The trauma of Knox and his men had stolen my voice as surely as if they'd cut it from my throat. The Apache didn't force me to speak. They watched me, included me in daily tasks, but allowed me my silence. Dasati especially seemed to understand, communicating with gestures and expressions, teaching me their ways without words. My voice finally returned on an autumn day when I spotted cavalry scouts approaching our camp. I'd been gathering wood at the edge of the forest when I saw the glint of sunlight on metal through the trees. Without thinking, I ran back to camp, the warning tearing from my throat in a rusty cry. The tribe moved swiftly that day, disappearing into the mountains, and avoiding the soldiers who would have forced them onto the reservation. Afterward, Kasil gave me my name, Nadoil Ea Choi. Strong wind. The name was both a blessing and a prophecy. Years passed, and I learned their ways. Dasati taught me their language, showed me how to prepare food, tan hides, and weave baskets. She taught me the stories of her people, the songs that marked the seasons and celebrated the spirits. We became sisters in all but blood, sharing secrets and laughter as we worked. Her initial kindness blossomed into a friendship that sustained me through the difficult transition from one world to another. Nantai taught me to track, to hunt, to move silently through the forest. He was a stern teacher, but a fair one. "The land speaks," he would tell me. "You must learn to listen." From him, I learned to use a bow, to ride as if horse and human were one being, to read the land like words on a page. He taught me to find water in seemingly dry places, to identify plants that could heal or harm, to navigate by stars when clouds obscured the moon. From other warriors, I learned combat with knives, with hands, with whatever weapon might be available. This training didn't come easily. Some of the men resented teaching a white girl, especially one who showed such aptitude. But Nantai insisted, and Kasil supported him. "She is Apache now," the chief would say when voices of dissent rose, "and all Apache must know how to defend themselves." I was neither Apache nor white. I existed between worlds, belonging fully to neither. The trauma of my time with Knox and his men had set me apart from other children my age, while my pale skin and blue eyes marked me as different among the Apache. But among them, I found something I had never known with my own blood: respect. Not as a possession, but as a person. They saw my strength, my determination to survive, and they nurtured it. The girl who had been Sarah was gone. Nakol Ilu Iwachoi had taken her place. As I grew into womanhood, I sometimes caught Nantai watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read, pride mingled with concern. "You carry anger like a stone in your heart," he told me once, as we tracked a deer through mountain valleys. "It weighs you down." "The stone gives me strength," I replied. He shook his head. "It gives you purpose, not strength. There is a difference." I didn't understand his words then. I would many years later. But by then it would be too late to thank him for his wisdom. When I was 16, soldiers came again. This time there was no escape. The cavalry surrounded our camp at dawn, more men than I had ever seen, their blue uniforms a wave that crashed against our small band. We fought, men, women, even children, but we were outnumbered. Many died that day, Casil Kain among them, taking 3 soldiers with him before a bullet found his heart. Those who survived, including Nantai, Siki, and Dasadi, were disarmed and marched toward the reservation at Bosque Redondo. I might have gone with them, accepted that fate as my family did, but in the chaos of battle, a young soldier saw my pale skin beneath the dirt and paint. He grabbed me, shouting to his commander that I'd been kidnapped, that I was being rescued. I fought him, biting and clawing, calling out to Nantai in Apache. The soldier held tight, and another struck me from behind with the butt of his rifle. When I woke, I was in an army fort, surrounded by white faces that looked at me with pity and disgust. They tried to civilize me at the fort, cut my hair, put me in a dress that felt like a cage after years of Apache clothing. The commander's wife, Mrs. Ellsworth, took special interest in my case, determined to make me a proper young lady. She taught me to read and write English, skills I'd forgotten since leaving my father's farm. She tried to teach me manners, sewing, all the things a white woman was expected to know. "You poor child," she would say, patting my hand. "What those savages must have put you through." I said nothing to correct her assumptions. I'd learned quickly that the truth, that the only real savagery I'd known had come from white men, was not something she or anyone at the fort wanted to hear. So I nodded and pretended to be grateful, all while planning my escape. Each night I dreamed of the mountains, of riding with Nantai, of Dasadi's songs, and I remembered Knox and his men. In the years with the Apache, the memory had dimmed, like a fire banked beneath ash. Now, surrounded by white men again, the embers flared. I began to remember details I'd suppressed, faces, voices, specific acts of cruelty. These memories woke me sweating in the night, and I knew I couldn't stay at the fort. I escaped after 3 months, stealing a horse, a rifle, and men's clothing from the quartermaster's supplies. I cut my hair short and bound my chest. The territory was no place for a lone woman, but a young man might survive. I rode hard for 3 days, avoiding settlements, living off the land as Nantai had taught me. When I finally stopped to rest, I looked at my reflection in a stream and hardly recognized myself. The girl was gone, replaced by a lean, hard-eyed young man with a permanent weariness in his expression. For 2 years I drifted, working cattle drives, taking odd jobs at stables and farms, always moving, always watching. I learned to handle a revolver from an old trapper who didn't ask questions about my past. He saw something in me, perhaps a reflection of his own solitary existence, and taught me to shoot with either hand, to clean and care for the weapon, to make my own ammunition when supplies ran low. I won my first proper gun in a poker game in Tucson, a Colt Navy that I carry to this day. The man who lost it tried to take it back by force, and became the first person I killed outside of battle. It was in a saloon in Santa Fe that I first heard the name Elijah Knox again. I was nursing a whiskey, listening to the conversations around me as I always did, gathering information about the territory, about which areas to avoid, which might offer work. Two miners were talking at the next table, comparing operations they'd seen. Finest setup I ever worked was Knox's place down near Silver City. One said, "Man knows how to run a mine." I went very still, my glass halfway to my lips. "Knox?" the other miner asked. "Elijah Knox? Thought he died in an Apache raid years back." "Nah. That was his first operation. He was away trading when it happened. Lost everything, equipment, men, even a servant girl they kept. But he started over, struck silver in the New Mexico territory. Rich as Croesus now, they say." The news stopped my heart, then set it racing like a wild horse. If Knox lived, perhaps others did too. The thought haunted me, robbed me of sleep. The embers of memory burst into flame. For years, I'd been drifting, surviving but not living. Now, suddenly, I had purpose again. I began to hunt. First, I needed information. I rode to Silver City, a growing settlement built on the promise of mineral wealth. Knox had indeed become something of a success in the years since I'd seen him last. He owned the largest mine in the area and had built himself a fine house on the hill overlooking the town. I found work at a livery stable, watching his operation from a distance, learning his habits. He'd grown fat on his success. His fine coat stretched across an ample belly, but I recognized him instantly. The sight of him made my hands shake so badly I had to hide them in my pockets. One night, in his cups at the local saloon, Knox mentioned his old partners to a business associate. Clayton had died in '63 of cholera during a trip to Denver. Tate had been killed in a dispute over cards in El Paso 2 years later. But Weber and the preacher, they were still out there. Weber ran a trading post on the Colorado border. I left Silver City the next morning. Knox would wait. I wanted all of them to know fear before they died. I wanted them to know I was coming, that the past they thought buried had risen again. Weber's trading post sat on the edge of nowhere, a last stop for travelers heading north into Colorado territory. It was a rough place. A single-story building with attached stable surrounded by the vast emptiness of the high desert. He didn't recognize me when I walked in. Why would he? The frightened child was gone. In her place stood a lean, hard-eyed young man in dust-covered clothes, a Colt on his hip. I bought supplies, coffee, ammunition, dried meat, and asked about lodging for the night. "Got a lean-to out back," Weber said, his missing front tooth still prominent when he spoke. "2 bits for the night, includes water for your horse." "Obliged," I said, keeping my voice low and rough, the way I'd learned to speak in my years passing as a man. I spent 3 days watching the trading post, learning who came and went. Few travelers passed through, a pair of prospectors, a family heading south, a lone rider carrying mail. Weber lived alone except for a Ute woman who cooked and kept house. On the 4th night, I slipped inside after the woman had gone to her separate cabin. I woke him with the barrel of my gun pressed against his forehead. "Remember me?" I asked, speaking for the first time in my natural voice. Weber's eyes flew open, confusion giving way to disbelief as he stared up at me. Recognition dawned slowly, then fear. "Can't be," he whispered. "You're dead. You died in that raid." "No," I said, "but you're going to wish I had." I won't describe what happened next. Some sins don't bear repeating. But I will say this, I took no pleasure in his suffering, only a cold, hollow satisfaction that did nothing to fill the emptiness inside me. When it was over, I burned the trading post to the ground. Let people think it was an accident or hostile Indians. I didn't care. Afterward, I rode hard for Arizona territory, where the preacher had built his church. The settlement was smaller than Silver City. just a cluster of buildings serving the needs of scattered ranches and small mining operations in the area. The church stood at the edge of town, a simple wooden structure with a modest steeple. Daniel Reichart, once known only as the preacher, had indeed found religion. I found him leading a congregation of perhaps 30 souls, miners, farmers, a few ranch hands and their families. He preached about redemption, about forgiveness. The irony might have made me laugh if I hadn't been so full of rage. For 2 Sundays, I sat in the back row of his church, hat pulled low, listening to him speak of God's mercy. He had aged, his once dark hair and beard now streaked with gray, but I would have known him anywhere. Each word from his lips made the stone in my heart grow heavier. On the 3rd Sunday, I waited until the congregation had gone, then locked the church door behind them. "Hello, preacher," I said. Unlike Weber, he knew me instantly. His face drained of color, and he reached behind him for the altar to steady himself. "Sarah," he breathed. "You're alive." "Not Sarah anymore," I said, drawing my gun. "Sarah died in that mining camp." He fell to his knees, but not in fear, in what appeared to be genuine contrition. "I've changed," he said, tears streaming down his face. "God has forgiven my sins." "Has he now?" I asked. "Then you admit what you did to me?" "I was a different man then," he said, his voice breaking, full of wickedness and cruelty. "But I found the Lord. I've spent years atoning." "Atoning how?" I demanded. "By hiding in this church, by pretending to be a man of God, by helping others," he insisted, "by trying to bring light where there was darkness." I laughed bitterly. "You brought nothing but darkness into my life." "Then kill me," he said, bowing his head. "If it will bring you peace." I cocked the hammer of my revolver, aimed between his eyes. My hand was steady now. Unlike when I'd first seen Knox, I'd come too far, done too much to hesitate. But something unexpected happened then. The church door rattled. A child's voice called, "Pastor Daniel, are you still here? May says to invite you for supper." The preacher, Daniel, closed his eyes. "Go away, Tommy," he called, his voice remarkably steady. "I'm in prayer. I'll come by tomorrow." "Yes, sir." The child's footsteps retreated. Daniel opened his eyes, looked at me. Tommy's father beat him and his mother. I helped them get away, gave them a place to stay until they could start over. That's what I do now. I help those who suffer as I once made others suffer. "Pretty words," I said. "But words don't erase what you did." "No," he agreed. "Nothing erases it. I live with it every day." I studied his face, looking for deceit, for the monster I remembered, but all I saw was a tired man awaiting judgment. "You know what happened to the others?" I asked. He nodded slowly. "Knox sent word about Weber. Said someone killed him, someone who knew about before. He thinks it's you." "It was. And now you've come for me, and then Knox." "Yes." He sighed deeply. "Sarah, that's not my name," I snapped. "What do they call you now?" I hesitated, then said, "Hawkeye." A flicker of recognition crossed his face. "I've heard that name. They say Hawkeye never misses a shot. They say he's killed a dozen men." "More," I said coldly. "And has it helped? Has any of it filled the hole they left inside you?" The question struck me like a physical blow. I almost pulled the trigger then, just to silence him. But I didn't. "What do you know about it?" I demanded. "I know about holes inside," he said quietly. "Mine is different from yours. I put mine there myself, with every evil act. I've tried to fill it with good deeds, with prayer, with helping others. Some days it feels smaller, most days it doesn't. I kept the gun trained on him, but something was happening inside me, something unexpected. Doubt crept in where certainty had been. "Show me," I said suddenly. "Show you what?" Show me this good you claim to do. Prove it's not just talk. And so began the strangest week of my life. I watched Daniel, the preacher, as he moved through his community. I saw him bring food to the sick, counsel the troubled, teach children to read. I saw the respect in people's eyes when they spoke to him, not the fear I'd seen in Weber's. I saw Tommy and his mother living in a small house behind the church, healing from wounds both seen and unseen. I watched Daniel sit for hours with a dying miner, holding the man's hand and speaking softly of comfort and peace. I saw him give his last dollar to a widow whose husband had been killed in a cave-in. I saw him wade into a bar fight to pull apart two men who might have killed each other, taking a knife slash across his arm for his trouble. On the third day, as he bandaged the wound, I asked, "Why do you do it? Any of it?" He considered the question carefully before answering, "'Cause I have to. Because the weight of what I've done would crush me otherwise." "You think good deeds balance the scale?" I asked skeptically. "No," he said. "The scale can never balance. But perhaps it can tip just a little toward something better." On the fifth day, a young woman came to the church, her face bruised, her arm held at an awkward angle. Her husband, she whispered, had done this when she'd burned the evening meal. Daniel took her to the doctor, then to Tommy's mother. When the husband came looking for her, drunk and raging, Daniel stood in his way. "She's not your property," Daniel told him. "She's my wife," the man snarled. "She's a child of God," Daniel replied, "and you will not touch her again." I watched from the shadows as the man drew back his fist. Daniel didn't flinch, didn't reach for a weapon. He simply stood there ready to take the blow. I stepped forward, my hand on my gun. The man saw me, saw the look in my eyes, and thought better of his actions. He left, cursing both of us. "You would have let him hit you," I said afterward. "Yes." "Why?" "Because violence is what I know best," Daniel said, "and it's what I'm trying hardest to unlearn." On the seventh day, Daniel found me sitting alone in the church. "Have you seen enough?" he asked. "I don't know what I've seen," I admitted. "A good act doesn't erase a bad one." "No," he agreed, "but perhaps a life of good acts counts for something. You think you deserve forgiveness." "I don't," he said simply, "but I try to earn it anyway." I holstered my gun. "I'm leaving tomorrow." Relief washed over his face. "And Knox?" "Knox is still mine," I said. Daniel nodded slowly. "I understand. But Hawkeye, revenge won't heal you." "What will?" I asked, suddenly tired beyond words. "I don't know," he said honestly. "I'm still trying to figure that out myself." I rode back to Silver City with a storm brewing inside me. Daniel's words echoed in my mind, competing with memories of the Apache, of Knox and his men, of blood on my hands. I thought of Nantai's warning about the stone in my heart. I thought of Desadi's steady friendship. I thought of Daniel, living a life of atonement. But when I saw Knox again, walking from his mine to his fine house, none of that mattered. The rage returned, hot and clarifying. I watched Knox for 3 more days. He lived in a fine house on the hill above town, had a wife now, and 2 young children, a boy of about 5, and a girl a few years younger. The sight of those children tore at something inside me. Knox, who had destroyed my childhood, had created a new life for himself, complete with innocence who called him father. On the 4th night, I slipped past his guards and into his study. He was alone, reviewing ledgers by lamplight. When he looked up and saw me, confusion crossed his face, then recognition, then fear. "You," he whispered. "Me?" I agreed, my gun already drawn. "How?" he began, then swallowed hard. "Weber? The preacher?" "Weber's dead," I said. "The preacher lives, though not by my choice." Knox's hands trembled as he reached for a drawer. "I have money," he said, "more than you can imagine." "I don't want your money." Then what? Revenge. After all these years? Justice, I corrected. For a little girl who had nowhere to run. His eyes darted to the door. My children are sleeping upstairs, he said. My wife? I know, I interrupted. I've been watching. Something in my tone made him pause. He studied my face. You're not going to kill me in front of them. It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. No, that would make me like you. Relief flooded his features. Then what do you want? I want you to confess, I said. To your wife, to the law, to everyone. I want the world to know what you are. He barked a harsh laugh. And destroy everything I've built? My reputation? My family? Never. Then I'll kill you right now, I said, raising my gun. Your choice. Fear returned to his eyes. You can't ask this of me. I'm not asking. For a long moment we stared at each other across the room. Then something in him seemed to crumble. Please, he whispered. My children. Your children deserve a father who isn't a monster, I said. Be that man or be nothing at all. In the end, Knox chose to live. I marched him to the sheriff's office at gunpoint, made him confess everything, the sale, the abuse, the other girls who had come before me and hadn't survived. The sheriff, a hard man named Blackwood, listened in growing disgust. When Knox finished, Blackwood locked him in a cell. I'll need your statement, he told me. I hesitated. I've been living as a man for years. Blackwood snorted. You think you're the first woman to put on trousers in this territory? Statement. Tomorrow. The story spread through Silver City like wildfire. Knox's wife came to the jail, white-faced and shaking. She spoke to her husband through the bars, then left without looking back. She took the children and returned to her family in the East. Knox lost his mind, his standing in the community. His former friends crossed the street to avoid him. Justice, of a sort. But it brought me no peace. I gave my statement to Sheriff Blackwood, using my birth name for the first time in years. He wrote it all down, his face impassive, but I saw the muscle jumping in his jaw as I described what Knox and his men had done. You've killed men, he said when I finished. Not a question. Yes. Weber? I nodded. Blackwood considered me for a long moment. Get out of my town, he said finally. Ride out today and don't come back. What about Knox? He'll hang, Blackwood said. If not for what he did to you, then for other things your statement will bring to light. There are bodies buried around that first mining camp, I'd wager. I left Silver City before Knox's trial. Some said he'd hang for his crimes. Others doubted it. White justice worked differently for white men with money. I didn't stay to find out. Instead, I rode south, toward the reservation where I knew the Apache had been moved again. The journey took weeks, through territory increasingly patrolled by soldiers. I avoided settlements, traveled at night when necessary, lived off the land as Nantai had taught me. When I finally reached the reservation, I found conditions worse than I'd imagined. Disease had claimed many lives. Starvation threatened more. The proud people who had taught me to survive were themselves barely surviving. Nantai was gone, killed in a skirmish with soldiers 3 years earlier. Seki had died of fever the winter before. But Dasadi lived, now with children of her own. When she saw me, she showed no surprise, as if she'd been expecting me all along. Nadiulia yo shoi, she said, taking my hands in hers. You have walked a long road. Too long, I admitted. And now, I don't know where to go. She studied my face. The spirits of those you've killed walk with you, she said. I see them in your eyes. I couldn't deny it. They deserved to die. Perhaps, she said, but their deaths have not freed you. That night, around a small fire, I told Dasadi everything. The hunting, the killing, the preacher, Knox's confession. She listened without judgment, as she had when we were girls, and I'd finally found my voice to speak of what had happened before the Apache found me. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "The white man's path of vengeance has not healed you. Perhaps it is time to walk the Apache path again." "What path is that?" I asked. "To find your purpose," she said. "To be strong wind once more. To bend but not break." I stayed with Dasadi's family for nearly a year. I hunted for them, taught her children as Nantai had once taught me. When soldiers came to the reservation, I used my status as a white woman to advocate for better conditions, more supplies. I wrote letters to territorial officials, to newspapers, to anyone who might listen about the conditions on the reservation. It wasn't enough. It could never be enough, but it was something. Word reached us that Knox had indeed been hanged, not for what he'd done to me, but for the murder of a business rival years earlier. My testimony had opened the door to other accusations, other crimes. Justice, finally, though not by my hand. In the spring, I received a letter from Daniel, the preacher. How he had found me, I didn't know, but the letter arrived with a supply wagon. Tommy's mother had died of consumption, and Tommy had no other family. Daniel asked if I might come to Arizona, help him care for the boy. "He reminds me of you," Daniel wrote. "Strong, despite everything." I showed the letter to Dasadi. "I don't know if I can face him again," I said. "Not after what he did. Not after I spared him." "The past cannot be undone," she said. "But the future is yours to shape. This child needs someone who understands his pain." "I'm not fit to raise a child," I protested. "No one is," she said with a rare smile. "Yet we do it anyway." We parted as we had lived, as sisters. Dasadi gave me a necklace of juniper seeds that her mother had made. "To remember who you are," she said, "not what was done to you." I rode back to Arizona with the summer heat, baking the land. The church looked the same as I remembered, though Daniel seemed older, more worn. Tommy was shy at first, hiding behind Daniel's legs when I arrived. But children are resilient. Within days, he was following me everywhere, asking questions about my horse, my gun, my knife. "Are you really Hawkeye?" he asked one afternoon as we sat in the shade of a cottonwood. I looked at Daniel, who shrugged apologetically. "Stories spread," he said. "I was," I told Tommy. "Not anymore." "What are you now?" the boy asked. I considered the question. "I'm still figuring that out." Daniel and I circled each other cautiously. Those first weeks. The past lay between us, a chasm neither of us knew how to cross. But Tommy needed both of us, and so we found ways to coexist, to cooperate, to build something like trust, if not forgiveness. Tommy was 8, a solemn child with watchful eyes that reminded me of myself at his age. His father's beatings had left more than physical scars. He startled at loud noises, flinched when Daniel or I moved too quickly. But beneath the fear, I saw a fierce intelligence, a will to survive that resonated with my own experiences. "He won't speak of what happened," Daniel told me one evening as we watched Tommy sleep. "His mother said it was bad." "It's always bad," I replied. "Words don't make it better." "No," Daniel agreed. "But sometimes they make it bearable." I thought of my own silence after joining the Apache, how it had been both shield and prison. "Give him time," I said. "He'll speak when he's ready." Months passed. Tommy thrived under our strange, fragile arrangement. I taught him what Nantai had taught me. How to track, how to move silently, how to read the land. Daniel taught him to read books, to cipher numbers, to question and think. Between us, perhaps we gave him what neither of us had had, a chance at wholeness. The congregation accepted my presence with varying degrees of curiosity and suspicion. A single woman living at the church, even one who helped care for an orphaned boy, raised eyebrows. But Daniel's word carried weight, and when he introduced me as an old friend who has come to help with Tommy, most accepted it without question. I found unexpected peace in routine, tending the garden behind the church, helping with repairs, teaching Tommy to ride and track. Sometimes, in the quiet evenings when Tommy was asleep and Daniel and I sat on the porch watching the desert stars emerge, I could almost forget the path that had brought me there. Almost. One such evening, as clouds scudded across a half-moon, Daniel asked, "Do you ever think about killing me?" The question didn't surprise me as much as it should have. Sometimes, I admitted, less often now. He nodded, accepting this. "I deserve your hatred." "Yes," I agreed. "But hatred is heavy. I've carried it a long time." And now, I looked out at the darkening desert, at the distant mountains that reminded me of the years with the Apache. Now I'm tired. "Me too," he said quietly. We sat in silence as stars appeared above us. Not friends, not enemies. Survivors, carrying our separate burdens, trying to do better than we had before. The winter brought snow to the high desert, transforming the landscape into something alien and beautiful. Tommy experienced his first snowfall with wonder, running through the drifts and laughing in a way I hadn't heard before. That night, as we sat by the fire in the small house behind the church that we now shared, Tommy spoke of his father for the first time. "He hurt Ma whenever the snow came," he said suddenly. "Said it was too cold to work, so he'd drink instead." Daniel and I exchanged glances but said nothing, letting the boy speak at his own pace. "He broke her arm once," Tommy continued, staring into the fire. "And when I tried to help her, he broke mine too." He touched his left arm, which I'd noticed sometimes bothered him in cold weather. "He can't hurt either of you now," I said. Tommy looked up at me, his eyes too old for his face. "Did someone hurt you when you were little?" The question caught me off guard. I looked at Daniel, who gave a small nod. "Yes," I said. "Men like your father hurt me." "What did you do?" I thought of Knox, of Weber, of the years of hunting. I made sure they couldn't hurt anyone else. Tommy nodded, satisfied with this answer. "A good," he said simply. That night, after Tommy was asleep, Daniel found me on the porch despite the cold. "You told him the truth," he said. "Not all of it," I replied. "But enough. He deserves honesty." "Yes," Daniel agreed. "He does." Something shifted between us that night. Not forgiveness. I don't know if such a thing was possible given our history, but understanding, perhaps recognition of the broken paths we'd both walked and the effort it took to forge new ones. The cough started that winter. At first, I thought it was just the cold, the dry air of the desert. But by spring, when the wild flowers bloomed across the plains and the nights grew warmer, it had worsened. I found myself waking in the night, struggling for breath, my chest burning as if I'd inhaled fire. Daniel noticed, of course. "You should see the doctor," he said one morning after finding me leaning against the well, trying to catch my breath. "I'm fine," I insisted. "Just a stubborn cold." But I wasn't fine, and we both knew it. The doctor in town shook his head when he examined me, his expression grave as he listened to my lungs. "Consumption," he said. "Advanced. I'm sorry." I'd seen it before in my mother, in others on the reservation. I knew what it meant. A slow wasting, blood-flecked coughs, the gradual drowning of the lungs, a death sentence. Daniel insisted I move from the small house into the church itself, where the ceiling was higher, the air better. He and Tommy cared for me as my strength ebbed. The irony wasn't lost on me, being tended by the man I'd once come to kill. Life has a strange way of completing circles we never intended to draw. As the illness progressed, visitors came. Former enemies became unlikely friends. Sheriff Blackwood from Silver City arrived one day. Having heard of my condition, he brought news that Knox's mine had been claimed by his former workers, who now ran it as a cooperative. Thought you'd want to know, Blackwood said gruffly. Something good came from what you did. The widow whose husband had beaten her, whom Daniel had helped, brought soup and sat with me on days when Daniel had duties elsewhere. Tommy rarely left my side, reading to me from the books Daniel had taught him with, his voice growing stronger as mine weakened. In my more lucid moments, I began to write these pages. Daniel provided paper, ink, a solid surface to lean on. Sometimes, when the pain was too great or my hands shook too badly, he took dictation, his face impassive as I recounted events he'd rather forget. The letter came from Dasadi, carried by a trader who traveled between reservations. Her eldest son had been chosen for special training by the elders. Her youngest daughter had been named for me, Nabul Yuyo Choi, strong wind. The Apache way continues, she wrote, even as the world around us changes. Now, as I write these final pages, I find myself thinking of Nantai and the day he pulled me from beneath those floorboards, of Dasadi and her steady friendship, of Daniel, who found redemption not in death but in a lifetime of atonement, of Tommy, who will read these words when he's old enough to understand them. My life has been a winding trail of violence and mercy, vengeance and grace. I've been Sarah, the abandoned child, Nako Yulio Shoi, the Apache warrior, Hawk I, the relentless hunter. Now, at the end, I am simply myself, a woman who survived, who fought, who finally learned that some wounds never heal completely, but life continues anyway. The other day, I overheard Tommy telling a friend about me. She's the strongest person I know, he said with the absolute certainty of childhood. She could have killed a lot of bad men, but instead she made them face what they did. Not entirely accurate, but I didn't correct him. Let him believe in a simpler story, at least until he's old enough for this one. To Tommy, who calls me Aunt Sarah now, know that strength comes in many forms. The strength to fight is valuable. The strength to show mercy, perhaps more so. The men who hurt me, who hurt your mother, wanted to destroy something in us. Don't let anyone destroy what makes you whole, and remember that wholeness can come in unexpected ways, through unexpected people. To Daniel, who sits beside me as I write, ready to take the pen when my hand grows too weak, I have not forgiven you. I may never forgive you. But I recognize your struggle to be better than you were. It mirrors my own. In another life, perhaps we could have been friends. In this one, we are what circumstance has made us companions in the aftermath of violence, both perpetrators and victims of our own stories. To anyone else who might read these words, judge me as you will. I've made peace with my choices. The fever grows worse. The pen grows heavier. Soon I will ride again with Nantai across the mountains. Soon I will sit by the fire and listen to Dasadi's songs. I will see my mother again, her face no longer drawn with consumption, but full and smiling as I remember from childhood. I hear the wind outside, whispering through the desert sage and juniper. It calls my name, not Sarah, not Hawkeye, but the name that defined me at my strongest. Nakol Yuyo Choi, strong wind. The name was both a blessing and a prophecy. And in the end, it was true.